one thing that I would like to say before I start is that I welcome your comments. So I know that that you're muted at the moment, but if you would like to make a comment at any time during my presentation, please feel free to do so. I'll definitely make time for that as we go through. You can also put your thoughts in the chat. There'll be some very provocative imagery tonight, and I know we have a lot of documentary photographers in our group. I know that you've had some amazing experiences. Perhaps you would like to share some of your own. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. There we go. Okay. Truth in documentary photography. A photograph is not an opinion, or is it? What is documentary photography? A style of photographs that presents straightforward records of events, people, and places. Tonight we'll question whether a photograph can be truly objective. Is it a clinical representation of reality? Just by your presence and the decisions that you make, sometimes you are changing the story. So the first thing that I would like to present tonight is to think about the purpose of the image. This particular image is by Kevin Freyer, and it was commissioned by the UN in a report to document the atrocities in Myanmar. I would say that this image really fits the criteria of what a documentary photograph is. We feel that this image is there to inform and educate. We make the assumption that Kevin Freyer has not done any extra post-processing. He's not trying to tell us something that's not happening. This would be an accurate representation of this moment in time. So one thing you'll notice is that he uses a wide angle lens. That's our storytelling lens. And so he's able to fill the frame. We have a diagonal line that takes us through the image. And it's a very, very powerful, powerful image of refugees on their exit from Myanmar. Then this is very, very different. This is an image by Joey L. And it brings up the question of how is a documentary photograph different if it's for use in a museum exhibition or a coffee table book? Is it primarily a piece of art? Is it for sale? Are the rules different for an image like this? So one thing that I would like you to notice straight off, oopsie, wait, let me go back. I can't move my mouse. Is that this image is not off the cuff. It's really planned and posed. Now, the first thing that I notice when I look at it is that the direction of the light is different than the light in the photograph, in the back of the photograph. So we can see that Joey L. usually photographs at sunrise, and he uses a strobe to light the face of his subject. He definitely gets to know his subjects very well. He goes to dinner with them, he hangs out with them, he has conversations with them to get them comfortable to work with him. And then he makes these absolutely spectacular portraits. This is still a genre of documentary photography in the fine art tradition. But as you can see, he's really adding supplemental light. He's working very diligently with all the tonal range. And so this would have a very different focus per se. And you can see also that he's really controlling that focus and putting the background out of focus, that this is not something that just happens in a moment, that this is taking a lot of work. And I want to show you a photo of Joey L. working. So this is pretty typical. You can see that it is at dawn. It's got very strong backlighting. So the person who's the subject is a silhouette, but here we see his lighting setup and how that will fill in all these shadows due to that backlighting. So what is the photographer's intent? This is an image by Richard Avedon, and it is of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Avedon did not like them, can you tell? He knew that they were terrible anti-Semites, and Avedon is Jewish, or was Jewish, and he was not out to make a beautiful picture of them. So when he got to the studio, knowing that they were huge dog lovers, he said, oh, on the way to the studio, I saw a dog get run over by a car. Snap the picture. And this is the one that he has. And I can't say that it was the most ethical thing to do, but that was what he felt he needed to do at that moment. Then we think about historical context. How did an image read at the time it was made? This is Jack. He lived on a plantation in Columbia, South Carolina. He was a driver. And this picture was taken by a photographer named Zealy, who was a very renowned portrait photographer at the time. And you can see it's in a beautiful case. It's a daguerreotype, so it was made on a silver plate, and very, very valuable at the time. It was commissioned by an anthropologist named Agassiz. Agassiz, now this sounds unbelievable today, but at the time that it was made, this was considered science by some. He worked for Harvard University, and it was his intent to show that people of African-American descent were less than human, that they were a different species, and so it was okay for them to be enslaved. So today we look at this and we can't believe our ears, but at that time it was taken very seriously. So here is a picture of Avedon working on his series in the American West. And I just have it up. Well, I want to just tell you that we should, some of the things that we should think about in terms of posing, choice of lens, depth of field and cropping, what to include and exclude, contrast, lighting, post-processing, anything that's done to completely change how the information is being interpreted. So this gets us started. What makes a great documentary photograph? Usually it's an image with a message, something that makes you think and question. It may be geared towards enlightening you on a problem in society, or it is documenting something for pleasure. So we'll start out with an image that is not documentary photography, but it certainly caused an uproar when it was made in 1859. Some people found this image really shocking, that the photographer would invade such an intimate and private moment. They felt like it was just too morbid and painful. There was no reference for it because the camera was a tool of truth. It was considered a scientific instrument. It was not used as a fine art instrument at that time. So let's look at this image for a minute and see if we can figure out what it is. Well, for those of you who have photographed inside, you might immediately notice that the photograph is lit really beautifully from the inside, but also we can see what's going on outside. This is 1859. So cameras did not have fast lenses. They didn't have electric lights. And so how did the photographer capture this scene? So now, you know, we can use HDR, we can use strobe, we can use all these things, but of course that didn't exist at the time. Well, this is actually a collage. It's 5 pieces. We have the woman on the left, the woman on the right, the girl in the chair. This is called fading away. She's supposedly dying of a broken heart or of tuberculosis, we don't know. Looks like maybe her father is looking out the window. He can't bear to look at her. How did Henry Peach Robinson create this image? He took 5 different photographs. Then he cut them into pieces and he reassembled them and he rephotographed the image. So at this time, everyone thought of image making as documentary. That's all there was. And so the idea of creating something as a piece of art was brand new. And it really did create quite an uproar when it was made. So now we try to think of documentary photography as unmanipulated by the photographer, but quite often it's not. And so that is what we are going to take a look at this evening. So here is one of the pieces from the collage. This is not exactly one that's in the collage, but it shows his process. So he photographed against a black cyc. He had a series of skylights that he was able to open and control the light. So I just want to go back to this for 1 second. You can see that everyone is lit exactly the same. So it's nothing that would happen in real life. Okay, so many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with this photograph of Florence Thompson. We now call it the Migrant Mother, but initially it was called Destitute Pea Picker. And what I'd like to do first is describe it for you. If we were in person, I would be asking you to describe it with me, but this time around, I'm going to do it for you. Some of you might know that it's been timed at museums when people look at paintings or photographs. Usually they spend about 10 seconds. How much can you learn about an image in 10 seconds? So we're going to spend a good little bit taking a look at everything that is happening in this image. So the first thing that I see is a woman. She has a baby in her lap. There are 2 other children in the image. They're looking backwards. The children have haircuts. That's an important factor in this, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Her clothes are disintegrating off of her. We can see holes in the clothes of the child on the right. Everybody looks really dirty. Look at the baby's face. This looks like a good mother. Why would the kids be dirty? We see that she is very wrinkled. Even though she is 32 years old, we know this, so she's had a very hard life. She's looking out into the distance. She's not looking into the camera. She has her face next to her arm. She's not leaning on her arm. Her hand is just touching her face. This is a very, very important point that we will get into in a little bit. If you look at the background, we can see a canvas. We don't know exactly where she is, what's going on. It looks a little bit like a studio shot. A lot of people think that it is a studio shot, but it's not. So let's go to the next screen. And I want to, this image was taken by Dorothea Lang, and I want to just show you something that she had tacked on her lab door. She said, it said, the contemplation of things as they are, without substitution or impostor, without error or confusion, is in itself a nobler thing than a whole harvest of invention. Francis Bacon. Well, let's see if Dorothea Lang is inventing this image. So we're going to start out with, when did this take place? It took place during the Dust Bowl, which was going on from about 1930 to 1936, and a bit beyond. It was a time when the land had been overplanted with wheat. During World War I, farmers were asked to plant wheat for the war, win the war with wheat, and they tore up every single plot of grassland that there was and planted wheat and planted wheat and planted wheat. And they just depleted the land terribly. So when a drought came and there was no access to water, there's no streams or rivers nearby, the land began to just die and blow away. And as you can see, There's nothing that's going to be planted on that land. Another thing that happened at that time, just one more little bit of history that I think is pretty fascinating, is that farmers were becoming rich before this drought, and they were getting more and more land on credit from the banks. In 1929, when the Great Depression hit, the banks started to call in these loans, and farmers couldn't meet them, and they foreclosed on the land, on the farmers. So consequently, the farmers had to leave their homes. It was a horrendous thing. In California, they were advertising for workers and saying you can get great jobs and come on to California. It's green, it's beautiful. We have all these crops, come on down. So people left everything that they knew. Towns folded. Everyone was affected by this. So it wasn't just the farmers, but it was the pharmacists, it was the teachers, it was the store owners. Everybody was profoundly affected by this drought. So here is Dorothea Lang, and she is up on her, I guess it's a woody, right? I don't know whether to call it a car or a truck, but there she is sitting on top with her Reflex camera, which is a large format camera. And one thing that I want you to think about as we look at more images of the migrant mother is how would she take a picture through this camera? It's not something that she would particularly hand hold. It uses sheet film, which has to be loaded in the dark, and you only have 2 pieces of film per carrier, and you have to use a handheld meter to take a reading for your exposure, and usually a tripod. So it's a very slow process. She's not doing anything instantly. She also worked with roll film, and I'm going to show you some images that she took with the roll film as well as with the view camera. So here is the first picture that Dorothea Lang took. And I want to just give you a little bit of background on how this all came about. It was a dark and damp and ugly winter that just went on and on and on. Dorothea Lang had been working for the Farm Security Administration, which was an arm of the Department of Agriculture. Its purpose was to document the plight of agricultural workers, migrant workers, during this time of the Dust Bowl. And the reason being that government money was going to help families. It was setting up resettlement areas. It was putting people back on healthier farms. And the American people needed to be educated about these programs and know that their money was being well spent. FDR also wanted to get reelected, and he wanted people to know where this money was going. So it was a dark and dismal day. Dorothea Lang was driving home after a long time of being in the field, and she was tired. She was ready to see her family, and she passes this farm with a sign that says, "Pea pickers needed." She's thinking to herself, well, I've done everything that I can do. Why would I stop? I'm gonna keep on going. So she's driving home, and during 20 miles, she's thinking, I really should go back. And she's arguing with herself about what she should do. She feels herself turning around the wheel of the car and heading back to this pea picker camp. So she sees this family on the edge of a road. One thing that I want to tell you that I think is really important is the location of where this was. Being at the edge of the road was a very, very dangerous place for this family. Migrant workers were not welcome in the communities where they landed. People were very, very angry and upset, and sometimes they became violent with the migrant workers. They felt like they were bringing disease into their communities. They did not want the children in the schools. The kids didn't have shoes to wear or clothes to wear to school. It was a terrible, terrible time, and people were very, very resentful. So being stranded on the side of a road was not a good thing for the migrant mother. So I want to just read to you for a second what Dorothea Lang said about this meeting. She said, "I was following instinct, not reason. I drove into that wet and soggy camp and parked my car like a homing pigeon. I saw and approached the hungry and desperate mother as if drawn by a magnet. I do not remember how I explained my presence or my camera to her, but I do remember she asked me no questions. I made 5 exposures, working closer and closer from the same direction. I did not ask her name or her history. She told me her age, that she was 32. She said they had been living on frozen vegetables from the surrounding fields and birds that the children had killed. She had just sold the tires from her car to buy food. There she sat in that lean-to." Well, some of this is true and some of this is not true. But let's take a look at this first image. If you have any comments, please put them in the chat. And Sandy, feel free to just stop me at any time if there's something that you would like me to respond to.
Okay, I'll let you know. Thank you, Phil.
Okay, sure. So is this a person who wants her picture taken? That's the first thing that I see. Dorothea Lang obviously used her 35mm camera here. We can see that it's certainly not of the same quality as the original picture. So Florence Thompson, the mother, is looking away. It was probably pretty embarrassing. She's a person who had a lot of pride. Why is this person just coming up here with a camera and snapping a picture without my permission? Then there's the little girl who's standing next to her. She's got a big smile on her face. She's reacting to this well-dressed lady coming up. What is she doing? What are those things that she has? And she's smiling for the camera. Then we have the teenager who I think is pretty looking like a typical teenager, kind of sullen. She certainly doesn't want her image taken. This photograph is kind of, here I am, I'm just going to snap a quick picture. And then she starts to talk to Florence Thompson. So she lets her know what she's doing and lets her know that help will be on the way. Let me take your picture, let me tell your story, and I will send this off to the Farm Security Administration. I promise that it will not be published in a newspaper. That was not true. That's the first thing that she did, was had it published in San Francisco, which was really, really terrible. So they get together and now they are posed in front of their lean-to. So Florence Thompson agrees to this. She doesn't look very comfortable at all. Dorothea Lang has a lot of information in the picture. So she has the lean-to, she has the kids, everybody's kind of lined up. We have to remember that Dorothea Lang was originally a studio photographer. So she, in a sense, is lining them up in a way that she might have done it in the studio. We get a sense of where this is taking place. It looks very empty, but there were actually thousands of people in this pea field who were all starving and all having a really, really rough time. So then she starts to work with Florence Thompson. So here's one more 35mm image. I just found this image. I did not know that it existed. So I was pretty excited when I saw it. And as you can see, it's definitely an outtake. It's not at the Library of Congress where these photos reside. And all the photos from the Farm Security Administration are at the Library of Congress. I will give you a link as we go a little further on. But as far as I know, this is not in that collection. So this one obviously is not working very well. But one of the first things that Dorothea Lang does is ask the mother if she will nurse the baby. Maybe it's to keep the baby from crying, or maybe she is thinking of a Madonna and child. Dorothea Lang certainly knew about the history of art, and that might be something that she was thinking of. But this little child on the left is not doing a great job with her expression. So now she starts to work with her 4x5 camera. How do I know this? Well, we can see that it is a piece of sheet film. If you look down at the bottom of this image, you will see notches. For any of you that have worked with large format, you will remember that when you're loading sheet film, you have to do it in the dark. And the only way to know what the orientation of the film is, what's in the front, what's in the back, upside down, right side up, is to feel these notches. And I'm kind of remembering back, I think we used to rotate it until they were on the top left. And you have a film holder that has 2 pieces of film in it. So here she is starting to work with the mother and a different child who is not making so many faces. And this is a pretty good image, but Florence Thompson looks kind of worried and concerned and uncomfortable. And but it's not bad. She's leaning the child on her shoulder. This seems to be a device that she likes to use. And she's looking out, but she feels like maybe this isn't the one that's going to do it. You'll see there's an empty pie plate on the suitcase that tells us that, it's lean times. There's nothing in that pie plate. We look on the ground and we see that it's just sand. Nothing is growing here. So let's go to another one. Here we go again, leaning on the shoulder, but this time the child has a really goofy expression. Florence Thompson is just not able to look as though she's into this. She's very, very uncomfortable, but she's following directions. She's doing what Dorothea Lang tells us she should do. Here we go again. She's trying one more time, but the mother just, her expression is just not rocking it. So then she comes up with this idea. She will turn the children around. They will not make faces. They'll lean on the shoulders. She really, really likes that. She will have Florence Thompson slightly lean on her hand. She's not really putting any weight on the hand, but this is a device to push up her face so that she's looking out, so that she doesn't look despondent. It looks like she's looking out, into the future. It has a very dreamy kind of look. It makes her look like she's this iconic figure. So this is, of course, the most iconic image of the Farm Security Administration, a really, really fabulous, fabulous photo. But what she had to do to get that photo, I have to wonder, was it really ethical? And what is she saying about Florence Thompson? Number one, the title, Destitute Pea Picker, is not correct. Florence Thompson was there with her husband and 2 other children. Their car broke down. They were migrant workers. They were coming from a beet field to go to a lettuce field, but their car broke down. The timing belt broke. And when they tried to fix the timing belt, they put a hole in the radiator. So the husband and 2 boys were rolling that radiator into town to get it fixed. So they had a car, they had money for gas. They were much better off than many, many other people. So when the husband and the boys were gone, Dorothea Lang had already sent in this image to the Farm Security Administration, and she sent it off to a newspaper in San Francisco. And while the fathers and sons were in town, they saw the newspaper with this picture. And there was a big ink spot on Florence Thompson's forehead. And one of the boys thought that she had been shot. So it was very, very distressing all the way around. Florence Thompson was a very strong, independent woman. She was actually a worker for, an organizer for the farm workers. And so this image brought tremendous, tremendous shame to her. Also, I just want you to notice one thing. If we look at the child's hand here, we can see how dirty everybody is. this was a fairly desperate situation where there was no water. So how do you cook? How do you clean? You know, that was really, really a big mess. But they did get out of there. And, you know, she went on to marry a hospital administrator. I think this present husband died, but she ended up being okay. But she felt shame for this for the rest of her life. So here's what Dorothea Lang says. She says, for me, documentary photography is less a matter of subject and more a matter of approach. The important thing is not what's photographed, but how. My own approach is based upon three considerations. First, hands off. Whenever I photograph, I do not molest or tamper or arrange. Second, a sense of place. Whatever I photograph, I try to picture as part of its surroundings, as having roots. Third, a sense of time. Whatever I photograph, I try to show as having its position in the past or in the present. Well, I think, you know, certainly she did molest, she did tamper, and I'm wondering from the group if anyone has a different feeling. You've all seen this image, a different feeling about this image now than when we first started. Oh, I see a bunch of
Yeah.
cats.
So Phyllis, first of all, Kenny has a question. Oh, but first of all, what I want to let you know is that Lynn said, totally love the way you've gone through the Dorothea Lang series. You've really done your research
Oh,
to provide a compelling backstory. I agree. So that I just wanted you to know that. But Kenny, you have a question.
yes, Kenny.
Yeah, the question, I'm looking, actually, what you just read from Dorothea is probably where my thinking is coming from as far as doing documentary.
Mhm.
Like I said, I just got back from Guatemala,
Right.
and in shooting there, I can pose a subject, or I can just shoot it as it is.
Right.
My feeling is that when I'm posing a subject, I'm changing the narrative.
Mhm.
When I'm shooting it as it is, where what I see is what I shoot, I kind of look at that more as the original style of documentary photographing.
Mhm.
I am telling the story just as it is. And so so that was my question. Some of these photographers are actually, you know, I mean, I don't have a problem with adding light, but I guess my concern is that when they're posing, aren't we really changing the narrative of the story?
Well, I think in this case, yes.
Yeah.
Because the public never saw the outtakes. They're only seeing this one.
Right.
So they're making a judgment about her. She's the iconic image of the mother. It doesn't say anything about her suffering. She looks like she's kind of above it all.
Mm.
And so, you know, I have such conflicting feelings about this, and I'll toss this out to the group too. Is this image more important than the person? She felt tremendous shame over this image. She did not feel that it showed her who she truly was. And also knowing that it ended up on billboards, it ended up in coffee table books, it ended up in the newspapers. Did she ever receive a penny for it? Not until she was on her deathbed.
Mm.
Her children contacted the newspapers, I think it was like a TV station, and said, you know, this is Florence Thompson. She has cancer. She needs help. Would you please put out the word for people to help her? And indeed, you know, money did come in.
Mm.
But in the days when this was taken, help did come, but it came too late for her. They had already moved on by the time, you know, food came to this pea field. So, you know, I really, really have mixed feelings about this image. I think it's a fabulous image, and it probably did so much good because it changed opinion about the money that was being spent on the migrant population. Oh, one thing that I should tell you, this is very, very interesting and sad, is that Florence Thompson was a full-blooded Cherokee. And now her husband was Caucasian, he was from California. So perhaps she would have qualified for aid. But if she had tried to go to resettlement camp, which was run by the government, she would not be allowed to stay in the camp because she was Native American. And that is very, very shocking and sad and horrible. So they had a very, very tough life. But the other thing that I want to tell you, just one last thing about this, when the children were interviewed later in life, they said that they actually had a wonderful family, that it was very close and very loving. And despite all the hardship, they stuck together and survived. So, okay, any other comments?
Yeah, Phyllis, yeah, we're getting quite a bit.
Okay,
So what I will say is that, you know, people are changing their minds, you know, thinking about this, knowing the backstory.
Mhm.
And Harry has asked, you know, how did you know she felt ashamed? What have you, you know, researched?
right. We know that she felt shame because her children have told us so. So when the children became older and talked to their mother about this image, she conveyed that she felt that it portrayed her in a way that wasn't accurate.
Yeah. And Ron
Yeah.
Zimmer. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah,
Hey, Ron.
yeah. Let me say, just my personal, I was in Israel, I was studying, can you hear me?
Ron, it's a little hard to hear you.
Ron,
Okay, and then we fix the audio, okay.
No, you put the mute back on, Ron. We could kind of hear you. You just were far away. Maybe get closer to the mic and unmute yourself.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, while he's doing that, Nelson Smith has said, look at the good, which was the purpose of the photo. She looks like a mother that most people in the country could relate to at the time. You know, so what we're seeing is that people are starting to really think about this image in particular, but also documentary photography. So interesting. Has Ron got his question?
Well, before he unmutes himself, one of the things that I wrote in there,
Yeah.
and it's interesting that you were saying, Phil, about, and you just kind of made me think, is the good that is done with the photo subsequent to the photo shoot,
Right.
is that outshine? Is that more important than any damage that's done to the individual or subjects of the photo? I guess that's the ethics question.
That is
Yeah.
the question, and you have to be Solomon to figure that out. What I guess my question is, could she have been found? Is there any way that something could have been done for her, maybe later in life? And why didn't she contact the media earlier to say, why am I not benefiting from all these pictures that have been sold of me? You know, why am I not benefiting from my picture being in these books? Why am I not benefiting from things being sold in my name? So this picture is, you know, has been everywhere. So
Or why was the
I think
farm
that-
administration or the photographer not curious to find her? Put in an ad or something to get her story.
Well, there were thousands and thousands of pictures at the Farm and Security Administration, but this was the most iconic. Oh, and I should tell you, this is another interesting thought. I don't know how far we're going to get in this lecture because we're spending a lot of time here, but I'll just say this one last thing, that Dorothea Lang also regretted taking the picture. The reason she regretted taking the picture is that she could never top it. So no
Yeah,
matter what she
yeah.
did, this was the highlight of her career, and she had a long way to go. So let's go to, oh, wait a minute, why is this not going forward? Oh, I just wanted to show you real quick some of her studio photography. She always uses the shoulder. So here's another image by Dorothea Lang, which I think is pretty interesting and shows that she will go to any lengths to get a picture. Now, this family is way worse off than Florence Thompson's family. As you can see, they don't have a car. They have left their farm on foot, or maybe they had a car, but they didn't have any gas for the car. The car broke down. So she's taken this picture of this family walking down the road. And you'll notice that on the left-hand side, there is a can in the road. Dorothea Lang threw that can in the road and snapped the picture when the little girl in the wagon looked back at her. So she has a lot of devices to be able to take these pictures. And I should tell you also that Roy Stryker, the administrator of the Farm Security Administration and the one who hired all the photographers, he was fine with any kind of invention. So he said, if you want to take a picture of someone who cans peaches and it's not peach season, you can still take a picture with the peaches. It's okay. The story is the most important thing. And remember that this was a propaganda agency. It was a propaganda for good, but it was still a propaganda agency there to sway public opinion. And one last picture from this time, I just wanted to show you the way that people were living in some of these camps. They built houses out of cardboard. Now, when the rains finally came, of course, everything washed away. This was the most desperate time. If you want to learn about this, John Steinbeck wrote a book called The Harvest Gypsies. I'm going to give you a link to it in a second. He describes a life that was beyond comprehension that it could have happened in our country. People were so poor, they were so depressed that they could barely function. They didn't have clothing for their children. Their children were dying from malnutrition. Women were dying in childbirth. They just lost the will to live. And it wasn't until World War II that the men could go away to war and finally support their families. So what a horrible time in our country. Oh, one last thing that I'll say, this is it on this whole subject, but another reason why people had to leave their farms were that the dust storms were so horrible that the sky would absolutely turn black. You couldn't see what you were doing. You had to have a rope to get from your house to the barn. And children were breathing in so much dust despite masks that they were coming down with this thing called dust pneumonia. And many, many children were dying. So it was just desperate. So they just had to get out. And then once they got out, they faced, these horrible circumstances. So here is some information for you of the Farm Security Administration photographs. You might want to take a screenshot of that. And you can see that some of the greatest photographers, Walker Evans, Gordon Parks, Arthur Rothstein, just fabulous photographers were part of that whole administration there. So, try this again. There we go. Okay. Osceola McCarty. Osceola McCarty, we're going to kind of the present here, maybe about 15 years ago now, I guess, or 20 years ago. Osceola McCarty was a washerwoman philanthropist. This image is taken by Annie Leibovitz. And when we look at this image, what do we see? Do we see a person who donated $150,000 to the University of Southern Mississippi? I don't see that. Now, it was part of a show on women at the Corcoran. I don't know if any of you saw that show. That show was phenomenal. And the title of this was Philanthropist Washerwoman. So that was in itself a good thing. But it was the first digital show that I had ever seen. It was life-size images, really, really fantastic. But let me first tell you a little bit about Osceola McCarty, and then we'll talk about the ethics of taking this picture. So she had a really, really bad start in life. Her mother was raped when she was tending a sick relative. She on her way back to her home, and Osceola was conceived during that horrible incident. And she was raised by her grandmother and her aunt, who cleaned houses and cooked and did laundry. Osceola actually loved washing clothes. This was something that she just really, really enjoyed. When her aunt got very sick and could not clean and wash anymore, Osceola took over. She was only in 6th grade. She had to drop out of school. And she was extremely diligent. She was very, very frugal. And she started saving money from a very young age. She was, just 11 or 12 years old when she had to go to work full time. She was storing her money in her doll buggy. So you can see how young, how immature she was. But, these women all supported each other, helped each other. So one day she decided that she should go to a bank. She'd never been to a bank. She didn't know what to do. She had the teller help her to set up a savings account. And from then on, she started saving her money. She saved little bits. You can imagine she's washing clothes. How much is she making? She started saving little bits her entire life. And when she retired, she donated this $150,000 to University of Southern Mississippi. So Annie Leibovitz hears about her and comes to photograph her. Now, this is a part of the story that I find extremely heartbreaking. When Annie Leibovitz got to her house, she said it was a very small, simple house. Osceola was dressed in a red suit. She had on a wig. She had on makeup, ready to take her picture. Annie Leibovitz said, I don't think this is right. I really think that you should, this just doesn't feel right to me. What else do you have to wear? What's that dress hanging on the door of your closet? She said, oh, that's my house dress. That's my day dress. I wear that every day. Annie Leibovitz said, put that on. And then she took her outside and took her picture. To me, this is cruelty. To Annie Leibovitz, I think she felt like she was saying, this person has worked hard her whole life. She's just a regular woman who did an extraordinary thing. I do not know why. And again, I think it goes back to, is the picture more important or is the person more important? I think that this is a very, very cruel image. I'm wondering if we have any comments about that, if you guys agree or disagree. Is there anything about that yet? If not, I'll move on to another picture.
No, there are no questions yet. Anybody wanna?
Well, we'll go forward a little bit first.
I do. I have a quick comment,
Oh, yeah.
which is, if you're a paid photographer, you're on an assignment and you're told to get a certain type of photo. So I don't know if it's a question. I mean, I think that's where it gets really sticky, because you're given an assignment and you kind of have guidelines, you kind of have an image that's what you're getting paid to get. And so, which way do you go?
Right. So in this case, Annie Leibovitz is working for herself. This is an independent project for an exhibition at the Corcoran. It's going to be in books, expensive books. I have that book. And what does Osceola get out of it? I think it shamed her in a sense. Now I want to show you another picture of Osceola taken by somebody else. I do not know who this photographer was. I've researched it, but cannot dig that up. And it's a very, very different kind of image. Here, she's very proud. She's happy. She has on her makeup. She has on a beautiful dress. She has on her wig. She feels comfortable. She has a beautiful jewelry, her earrings. In the back is the clothesline. I just think that's a spectacular image. So if we kind of compare and contrast here, which one tells the story better? So one thing, now I gave this lecture to another camera club, and one of the members had a thought, and I kind of agree with it. What would have been nice would have been if Annie Leibovitz had taken 2 pictures and done a diptych, one of Osceola in her day dress and one of her in her suit and her hat, and in her wig, and in a way that she felt more comfortable. So when Annie Leibovitz photographed dancers in Las Vegas, she showed them with all their feathers and their outfits and all the glitz and glam. And then she also showed them in their glasses with their kids, in their sweatpants. So she had thought of that, but she didn't think of it for Osceola McCarty. So anywho, I think that, there's a lot of ethical questions that could be asked about the image.
Yeah, and Phil, we're getting a few people agreeing with you and sort of referring to the need for, ethical practice of photography.
So yeah, it is a fine line. And I know when I was teaching documentary photography at Hopkins, and I would take students to the east side, to a very challenging neighborhood where there was a lot of poverty. One thing that I want to say real quickly is those visits ended up really benefiting the community. The students got involved and built a beautiful park and everything else. But one thing that I always told the students was that their subjects had a tremendous amount to teach them, and to always listen first. You don't have to grab that image right away. Let the person tell their story, and then think about how you might want to represent them. And, I think Annie Leibovitz would have done a better job with that. Now, Annie Leibovitz did not only ask Osceola McCarty to change her outfit, she also asked the Queen of England. She asked the Queen of England to take off her crown. And I do have about a minute little movie here, which I think this will just give us a laugh. So I'm going to play this for a second, and maybe so here we go.
We've got quite a lot packed into this half-hour session, so it's going to have to move very much like clockwork. But the important thing is that it goes very, very smoothly, because to get all 4 options in is actually going to be quite a job.
Annie Leibovitz and her 11 assistants have spent 3 weeks preparing for the half-hour shoot. But the Queen's elaborate costume has taken longer than expected to put on. The start of the session has been delayed by 15 minutes. She will be wearing the full regalia of the ancient Order of the Garter, complete with tiara. Few royal outfits could be more complicated or cumbersome.
An extraordinary crew that we are so glad to be here today with you, and my daughter Sarah. I'm so sorry.
Even with time so tight, Annie Leibovitz has planned a number of different setups. She steers the Queen to a bench in the White Drawing Room.
And Andrew and Michael helped with the
The complex garter robes are adjusted by the Queen's dresser. But Annie Leibovitz wants a last-minute change.
I think it will look better without the crown. I've heard you to do your own hair, which I believe is so amazing, your own hair and makeup. Can you try it without the crown? Just, it will look better, less dressy, because the garter robe is so dressy. What I mean is, if you take the crown off, just hold it. If you take the tiara off, you can't. No. Okay. Well, I have an idea.
Okay. So as you can see, Annie Leibovitz even as the Queen. All right, let's go. So I just want to show you a couple pictures of the Queen from that shoot. Really beautiful. So the homework paid off. Here she is without the crown. And then I wanted to show you this one because I think this is so funny. You might have noticed that there was a big white cyc in the room and she photographed the Queen against the cyc. Then she put her against this background. It's a collage, but done so poorly, the Queen looks like she's about 10 feet tall. So I just think it's kind of a funny image. Anywho, let's move on here. Street photography. Street photography is a genre of photography that records everyday life in a public place. The very publicness of the setting, excuse me, enables the photographer to take candid pictures of strangers, often without their knowledge. So let's take a look. Cartier Bristol, I'm sure you all know, he's the greatest street photographer that ever lived. He says there's a creative fraction of a second when you're taking a picture, your eye must see a composition or an expression that life itself offers you, and you must know with intuition when to click the camera. That is the moment the photographer is creative. So here is, I think, one of the greatest all-time street photographs. It's taken at the Gare Lazare. Cartier Bristol was photographing through an iron fence. And what makes it so fantastic is indeed the decisive moment, which is the moment when right before the foot hits the water. We can see that there are these wonderful repeating forms of the reflection, of the circus poster in the back, the reflection of that. And then we have this wonderful feeling of what's going on in the background. So a really, really fantastic photo. Now, one thing that Cartier Bristol says about his own work is that he never crops, he never tampers with anything, he never changes anything. Well, that's not really the case. If we look at the negative from this decisive moment, we will see that we have a lot of water in the foreground that's not there. He cropped that out. And also he was looking through a fence. So he has, you know, one of the iron railings of the fence. So, you know, this does not bother me at all. I think it's fine, but photographers seem to have a big stake in saying that they don't alter anything. So I just wanted to show you this one really wonderful image of Cartier Bristol's. He photographed with a Leica, which was a new camera at the time, very, very small. And so he could just do seat of the pants photography. And he used to carry around in a handkerchief and pretend that he was blowing his nose. And people did not know that he had the camera. One other thing I want to show you about this is if you look at the edges of the photo, you'll see a black line. This is from what's called a filed out negative carrier. And when we were in the darkroom in the good old days, and some of you I know are still in the darkroom, if you had a carrier that was a little bit bigger than the image, when you exposed it to light, the area that was bigger and empty would come out black, and that would show that it was a full frame image. So now, this is masquerading as street photography, I would say. This is by a photographer named Ouija. His real name was Arthur Fellig. He took the name Ouija because he was so speedy finding crime scenes that people thought that he must be using a Ouija board. So he was a very, very interesting guy. He considered himself a fine art photographer as well as a documentary photographer. He was an independent photographer who would listen to his police radio and then run down and take pictures. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But this is a picture from the opening of the Metropolitan for the first opera of the season. It's taken during World War II. Now, I'm just going to remind people of something. I don't know if you remember this, but right after 9/11, at the Academy Awards, people were told, don't dress up as much as you normally would. You know, tone it down this year, tone it down. The same thing was said during World War II. So people were told, your guys are fighting, you know, they don't need to think about you bejeweling yourselves and dressing up, you know, tone it down. Well, obviously, look at all these bracelets and rings and earrings and, you know, and tiaras and oh my God, they're dressed to the nines. So Ouija wanted to say something about this. He wanted to make a comment about it. So he had his assistant go down to the Bowery and find this woman that they knew and get her drunk. And then they took her to the red carpet and they had her stand there. And then Ouija was taking pictures as though he was a society photographer and got this amazing picture, and it's called The Critic. Well, the picture has a bit more of an interesting history. So in a sense, Ouija was using this as a commentary on what is happening at home while the boys are out fighting. Well, the Germans had the same idea. They got a hold of this picture. They made thousands of copies of it, and they dropped it into the foxholes during World War II. And as a matter of fact, the grandson of this woman, her name is Mrs. George Washington Kavanaugh, he was in one of the foxholes and got this picture, and obviously, you know, was pretty upset about it and did not tell anyone. So I want to show you a couple more images by Ouija. He was actually a really spectacular photographer. His images profoundly influenced film noir. This is called Their First Murder. I just think this is a great image. So we know that in the foreground, there is a dead body because we understand that from the title. Ouija took this picture, he turned around and photographed the crowd. So we see this kid who's very exuberant, really excited. We see the kids fighting to be able to see. We see this woman, this woman in the foreground who looks very, very upset. One thing that I think is very interesting about this, it almost feels like it's taking place on a stage. Why is that? Ouija used a very bright flash on his camera. And so, as you may know, a flash only goes so far. So it stopped at the people, and then the background is in shadow. It's very underexposed. And consequently, it does have that feeling of being on the stage. So I just think it's a really fabulous, fabulous image. And here is Ouija with his camera. He was so speedy. I'm going to show you a picture of him in his bedroom. He took a lot of self-portraits. He considered himself a fine artist. In fact, he took many self-portraits of himself just like this in his bed. You can see that he has the cable release in his hand. Many of the images have different backgrounds on the wall, different posters and things like that. So we can see his speaker where it's hooked up to his police radio. And so he leaps out of bed as soon as he hears it and jumps in his car, and he would always beat everybody to the crime scene. And just going back to the car for a minute, he had all his equipment in the back, and he would actually develop the film in the back of his car and get it to the newspapers before their own people did. And so, you know, brilliant, brilliant photographer, fabulous. So social reform, addressing an issue, addressing a problem in society. Before I go on, Sandy, is there anything that you would like me to address from the chat? Hello?
I just wrote in there, we're all mesmerized.
Oh, okay. I just want to.
Listening with rapture to your story, so
Okay. I
keep going.
just got scared for a minute that no one heard a thing I said.
No,
Yes,
no, we're here.
yes, we are. We are.
Okay, so we'll keep going. Now, I have enough information here tonight for about 3 lectures. So at some point, just give me a signal that we're getting towards the hour and a half, and I will jump to what I think is probably the most interesting. So let's go to Jacob Riis, How the Other Half Lives. I would say this is the one image that I know of from a series of images by Jacob Riis that is probably the most unadulterated image that I can think of. So Jacob Riis was an immigrant from Denmark. He came to the United States with $40 in his pocket and a lock of his girlfriend's hair, hoping to become a carpenter. And he ended up living in the tenements in New York. He had all these crazy jobs, but he finally got an opportunity to train as a writer for a newspaper. And so he started working on articles about the tenements. This was something that he knew about very well. And the flop houses where people would, for a couple of pennies a night, be able to spend the night down in a basement in a horrible situation, as you can see. One day he got the idea, wait a minute, what if I learn photography and use images to go along with my articles? But there's a problem there. Where he wanted to photograph, there was no light. So he not only trained himself to use the camera, but he learned about magnesium flash photography. So that magnesium flash was very, very bright. And you could take it into a completely dark space and light it up like it was daytime. So he went into these flop houses in the middle of the night when everyone was fast asleep, and he would set off this giant flash. Well, you can imagine what happened a millisecond after the exposure that he made. People are jumping up out of their skins. So, you know, it was a very, very crazy situation. But I think that I call this unadulterated because he had no idea what he was going to get. He just pointed in direction. He didn't know who was down there, what was happening. And this is actually a fantastic photo because we see the shoes right at the edge of the frame. I love this. All the cooking utensils, the stove to keep them warm, their clothing, and these bags that they had to carry from place to place. So it really is a very authentic image, something that you would never get to see. Here is one I just want to show you. This is the magnesium flash that was actually, the hand was caught in the picture. He did have one experience where he set off the flash and he set the whole flop house on fire. So it was very, very dangerous. People were running and screaming for their lives. Here's one more. Very, very interesting guy. If you're interested in his photography, I would suggest getting the book, How the Other Half Lives. He really had a profound influence on people's understanding of poverty. When the tenements were made, I think this is a kind of a fascinating thing. They were built as tenements. They were built to house as many people as possible. And very unhealthy environment. They had a lot of interior rooms with no windows. People were coming down with tuberculosis. It was a horrible, horrible way to live. And so you would think, why would anybody be willing to come from Europe to live in a place like that? But I can tell you that what was going on in Europe during the pogroms was 1,000 times worse than coming to the United States. And within a couple of generations, you know, their sons were doctors and lawyers. So they were doing okay finally. Okay, the photo essay, Country Doctor W. Eugene Smith. The photo essay is a series of images, and in this case, text, that work together to tell a story. Now, because it's telling a story, I think the rules for documentary photography might be a little bit different because it really is a narrative. So this is an image from The Country Doctor. It was commissioned by Life magazine, and W. Eugene Smith, who was the premier photo essayist of his day, created this series of images of Dr. Siriani, who lived in Kremlin, Colorado. And it was a very poor community. They had a hard time attracting a doctor. Life magazine wanted a doctor who was very attractive and young and charismatic, and they really found it in Dr. Siriani. So W. Eugene Smith went to Kremlin, and he spent 23 days with the doctor. 23 days of driving this doctor crazy. He was a hard drinker. This is W. Eugene Smith, not the doctor. He was a hard drinker. He had a lot of anger management problems. He was staying with the Sirianis in their house, and at night he would play jazz really loud. He would argue with his editors. He really was a very, very volatile person, fabulous and talented, but very, very valuable. So here is the first image in the series. So he had a great beginning, and he had this in his mind, what he was going to say in the very first image. So he told Dr. Siriani that one day he was going to leap out of the weeds and take his picture when Dr. Siriani was on his way to work. And this is exactly what happened. He waited for a day when there were big storm clouds. He framed it so that Dr. Siriani is walking into the light. He's walking past an old fence post. He's walking through the weeds. He's kind of bent down a little bit, maybe going against the wind. It's a very dramatic image. And W. Eugene Smith is saying, this is a very dedicated guy. We don't know what he's going to face today, but he's courageous, he's strong. And so I think that this picture sums that up very, very well. Now I want to show you another picture of the same image. And this is the way that Life magazine might have printed it unless W. Eugene Smith had argued them into printing this one. So Life magazine liked to print things a lot lighter. And W. Eugene Smith really liked things very, very dark. And what he would do, actually, as I talk about this, I'm going to go back here. What he would do is he would darken images to the point where you would lose all the whites. And he used something called Farmer's Reducer. For those of you who worked in the dark, you might remember it. So now that we have Photoshop, it takes us 1 second to lighten and darken things. In those days, it was really complicated. You would put this bleach onto your photos, and then you would put it in areas that you wanted to lighten. So we can see that he most likely, did it on Dr. Siriani's face here. I don't know why that keeps jumping ahead. And so, but there's a problem with that. I was at the International Center for Photography, and I saw a bunch of W. Eugene Smith's photos, and a lot of them were completely disintegrating because he didn't wash the photos well enough, and the bleach was continuing to eat away at the photos. But so he had what was called a shooting script from Life magazine. So the editors were telling him, here's the story, this is what we want you to take, here's the kind of pictures we want you to take. Of course, Eugene Smith just always ignored everything that they were saying and fought with them constantly. So here's another image that kind of sets the scene. This is the little hospital in town. And knowing W. Eugene Smith and his work in a Spanish village where he set himself up and then told people exactly where to stand and what to do, I feel pretty certain that he did in this image as well. So we have someone watering the grass outside, and then the little boy on the bike, and we see the cars and the church, and it gives a nice sense of where this is all taking place. So this is something that W. Eugene Smith hated. He never wanted his images to be shown in a group. He felt that they were so strong that he wanted them to stand by themselves. And this is one reason why he was constantly fighting with Life magazine. So he followed Dr. Siriani around. As you can see, he's at his house when Dr. Siriani, maybe it's late at night, he just gets out of the shower. He's been called to, someone's house for an emergency. He's there when he's looking at x-rays, and in this case, he's calling on the phone to so someone had died and he needs to be picked up. So he's there for everything, and people just had to get used to him being around. So here he is, maybe it's the middle of the night, he's exhausted, he's lying down on the operating table. Now, this image is of an operation, and I'm going to show you in a second who's being operated on. A little girl got kicked by a horse, and here are her parents on the left-hand side. I just want you to notice the giant shadow that's behind them. Eugene Smith is using lighting in addition to what is going on the operating table. So it's a very horrible moment because their daughter has lost an eye. And so in what world during an operation would a doctor look away while he's mopping a child's eye? This eye is gone. So Eugene Smith is definitely directing things. They both swore that didn't happen, but obviously it did. And I just want to show you an image that really brings this to light. So here is Dr. Siriani. He has just come from a cesarean section. The woman has died, the baby has died, and it's a very horrible, horrible moment for him. So here he is smoking a cigarette and having a cup of coffee. Behind him, you see a very sharp shadow. This is Eugene Smith projecting light onto him, in a fairly dark situation so that he has enough light to make his exposure. But let's look at what the doctor's doing. So how is he drinking that cup of coffee? This is what I want to know. He has a cigarette in his left hand. He has the coffee cup in his right hand. He has his thumb through the handle of the coffee cup. How does this work? Obviously, Eugene Smith has posed him. And it kind of really irks me and makes me sad that the doctor has just gone through all this and Eugene Smith is telling him what to do. And he doesn't take just one. Here's another one. He tries it again. This time he has him drinking the coffee, but he has the cigarette in his hand and the saucer in his hand. So, impossible. So Eugene Smith is definitely directing everything. And this is the final image in the series. Eugene Smith did finally leave Life magazine. He went to Japan and made a tremendous series called Minamata about the poisoning of a village by a chemical plant. That is a fantastic series. It's a wonderful book if you ever want to get that book. So there's some ethical questions here. Definitely, he told a great story, but we can see that he's not just a fly on the wall, that he is doing a good bit of direction to the image. So Sandy, just let me know if
Okay.
you'd like to make a comment.
I just I wanted to leave room for questions.
Yes.
But I want to know what you're going to go into.
Okay, well, we'll keep it.
I'm okay to keep going. I don't know.
Yeah.
Others think.
But why don't we, I'll say something around, at 9:30. That is, 6 minutes from now.
Okay.
I feel the same way. And if somebody else doesn't agree.
Okay, well-
Doug has a comment there.
Yeah.
Doug and Christina. Where's the blood? That's what Chris says. And Doug said something else long. Doug, do you want to speak up?
It's muted. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Since we only have a few minutes, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to decide what to show you. I'd like to show you two more things. So if it's okay, I'm going to go over by a little bit,
Good.
and then we can open it up to just general questions.
We're fine. We're all in the comfort of our home, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot more, but I'm not going to go through everything tonight. I can see that. But fine art, photography, composition, and style are just as important as the message. We distinctly hear the photographer's voice. So I want to show you this image by Paul Strand. Paul Strand was a street photographer, and he was also a pictorialist. During the early years of photography, there was always this debate, is photography an art or a science? Paul Strand was definitely on the art side. So he had a camera that had a fake lens. And so the camera's lens would point in one direction, but he was actually taking a picture in another direction. So people really did not realize what he was doing. So he took a picture of this woman who is blind. What is he saying about her, and how is he saying it? Well, we can see that the image is very high contrast. So the blacks are really, really black. The whites are really, really white. How did he do that? And number one, what does it say about the woman? You know, to me, it says that she's having a really, really tough time out there. This is not a gentle image. So for those of you who know film photography, he underexposed the negative to get the blacks, overexposed the negative to get the whites, and then in the darkroom, he used graded papers to bring out more contrast and make it even darker. So it's a highly, highly manipulated, I can't even talk anymore, manipulated image. Now, I want to just tell you what Reuters has to say about images, and we'll see if this image would have been acceptable to Reuters. It says minor adjustments in Photoshop are acceptable. So this is this day and age. These include cropping, dodging, burning, conversion into grayscale, normal toning, and color adjustments that should be limited to those minimally necessary for clear and accurate reproduction, analogous to the burning and dodging previously used in darkroom processes of images, and that restore the authentic nature of the photograph. Changes in density, contrast, color, and saturation levels that substantially alter the original scene are not acceptable. Backgrounds should not be digitally blurred or eliminated by burning down or by aggressive toning. The removal of red eye is not permissible. Paul Strand, one of the greatest photographers who ever lived and one of the great documentary images, this would not qualify for Reuters. So I think that's pretty interesting. Okay, I just want to talk to you about Steve McCurry, and then I think we can, I have more, but I think that, you know, it's probably time to open it up to questions. I don't want to keep going too long. So I have a lot of beautiful, beautiful images to show you that we're not going to get to tonight. I'm very happy to post my PowerPoint as a PDF, and I will share it with the group so that you can see it. So Steve McCurry was hired by National Geographic to take pictures in India of train travel. And so this appears to be a candid image, but actually this woman is the wife of a friend of his who is a photographer. The porter is carrying empty suitcases because this took a very, very long time to take. And so it's a completely constructed, made up image to fit the scenario and the narrative of what the Time magazine article wanted. Here we can see Steve McCurry, now that he's in the digital age, that he highly manipulates his images. So the one on the left is the original image, and the one on the right is the one that National Geographic originally published. So we can see that on the left-hand side, we have a man who has been removed We can see that a bicycle or a cart has been removed, only the newspapers remain. We see that this cart over here has been removed. This fellow now has on a dark shirt and dark trousers. We have a light pole that has been removed. We have a person back here who has been removed. It reminds me in a sense of some of our critiques in Camera Club, where the judges will say, put in a sky, take out a light pole, do this, do that. You know, you guys probably have your own opinions about it. I have mine. But anyway, we're not news photographers. We're not there to inform. We're just there for enjoyment. But definitely, this would not qualify for Reuters. National Geographic, one of its covers, this is from February 1982. It's one of the first digital images in a magazine. And for this image, they moved the pyramids closer together to fit the format of the magazine. And now, of course, that would never, ever happen. But one thing to think about is that the person who shot the camels had them going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So the whole thing is kind of a fiction. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about tonight, and then I think maybe we'll call it a day, is this image from Afghanistan by Steve McCurry. And it is of an Afghan girl. Her name is Sharbat Gula. She was a refugee from Afghanistan who was running from the Russians who had killed her mother. She and her father and her siblings ran away to Pakistan. She was 10 years old. And Steve McCurry met her in a school for girls. Now, on the face of it, it seems like a very beautiful image. What could be wrong with taking a photo like this? It's actually really, really gorgeous. Well, here's one of the first images that Steve McCurry took. And we can see that she is shielding her face. What Steve McCurry did, which was a very unethical thing to do, was he was fascinated by her eyes. So he asked if he could take her picture. Now, this is a young girl. She's not going to stand up to a photographer. She was very scared. She was very upset. She was wearing a burqa. She was, in her culture, her face would not normally be seen. She wouldn't look into the eyes of another man. She would not expose herself. She would not be alone with a man in a room. And I think just the translator was there, and it was a very, very threatening situation for her. And Steve McCurry really took advantage of her. I also want to show you that the original image was photoshopped. So you can see he got rid of the tear duct here, you know, and cleaned up her eye because there was a little schmutz in her eye over here. And so the question is, you know, like, what did this do to her and to her life? It was a very, very traumatic experience for her. And he did go back to find her many years later, and they were able to confirm that she was the same person. And she told the story of how frightening it was. And she literally ran away from Steve McCurry. He had said that she ran off to play, but no, she ran away because she was absolutely terrified. He was asking her to do things that were completely alien to her culture and actually dangerous for her. And she had no idea that this image went viral, that her picture is being sold all over the world, and people are making money off of her while she is starving in Pakistan. And so no one ever made any, you know, attempt to contact her, to help her family. They just benefited from it, you know, for the next many, many years, and it made Steve McCurry really famous. So if you would like me to stop here, I will. I think I don't want to do anything else that's really dark because I think that that's kind of enough. And then I'll include this in
Yeah.
the PowerPoint.
What I'm thinking of is
Yeah.
that we will schedule Phyllis Berger 2.0.
Oh,
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
leave it here. I'm going to unshare my, stop sharing my.
Oh,
Okay.
I wish you would carry on, Phyllis. This is the most fascinating program I've seen here at the Camera Club. I love everything you're saying. It's so interesting.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
But we should have another presentation, Phyllis. That was wonderful.
Well, I'd be happy to do part 2 because
Yeah.
we made it maybe 2/3 of the way.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
I want to know more about you and what made you choose these images. What made you obviously did a lot of research into it. And so is this something that you've been thinking about for a while? And yeah, why did you choose to do them in the order that you did? Just a little bit more about what it
Sure.
meant to you.
Of course. Well, number one, I teach. So I teach documentary photography, and I have had to do this research over many years to prepare my students to go out into the world and take photographs. And also we have many, many conversations about the ethics of documentary photography. And I think that this was, an essential part of this conversation tonight is, who's more important, the person or the picture? I always tell my students that the person is the most important. And, we've had some fantastic experiences in the field. I'll just tell you real quickly one just wonderful experience that my students had. And I'll tell you how I personally screwed up. So we were photographing at Fells Point, and there were all these interesting characters on the street. And my students were talking to people and asked their permission to photograph them, and we're getting their stories. We were doing Humans of Baltimore. So photograph a person, get a story. Well, a woman comes running up to me and says, "What are you doing? This is private. She took me aside. She said, these are people that are in drug rehabilitation center.
Oh,
And this is an invasion of their privacy." And I said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Please forgive me." Happened, students. And then I was thinking, is there a way that we could do this that would be positive for the people in rehabilitation and the students? So I asked this director I can't remember the name of the agency, but anyway, that doesn't matter. I asked her if I could bring the students back, and if I could pair them up each with a client, and that they would sit for a half an hour with their partner, get their story, share their own stories, because they found that they had a lot of similarities in life, that they really weren't all that different from each other. Take that time to get to know each other, and then make a portrait for each person that they were paired up with. That turned out to be the hugest success, because they had spent that time getting to know people a little bit. Their
Yes.
clients were really excited about having their pictures taken, and they had a little bit of control over how they wanted to be shown. And so we made beautiful, beautiful images of them. We made 11 by 14 prints. We made lots of 5x7s and 4x6s that they could give to all their friends. And it was a huge, huge success. So I'm no longer teaching documentary photography because I've retired from that, but it's something that I do miss. So anyway, I'm very interested in the history of photography, how documentary photography evolved, and that plays into what I showed you tonight. the end of the lecture has a lot of contemporary images that are really beautiful and evocative. So that will be another time.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to it.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay, well, we'll schedule it.
Thank you.
yes,
think-
yes.
Harry has a question here. Harry,
Yes.
in today's digital age.
Yeah,
Harry?
let me go ahead and ask my question. I put it in the chat. So I'm curious today, it's with social media and kind of the digital world we live in, I would think it'd be really hard to get a photograph of someone, have it published in a publication unless they've signed a waiver
Right.
or some other way that they would be compensated. I don't know how that could, I just think it would be difficult I'm not saying it couldn't, but I'm saying it, I think today it'd be much less likely to happen.
Well, with documentary photography, if you are in a public place, you can take a picture and you do not need to get
Right.
consent. But I think that, if the person sees you, you definitely have to ask permission and, get them to sign.
Right, but if I'm in a public place, well, let's say I'm at Camden Yards and I see a
Yeah.
picture of this really cute kid with a baseball and his dad, and I go, oh, it's a great photo. Take the photo, and then I freelance it to the Baltimore Banner or the Sun, and they use it. So, where's the line go?
Well, I think that crosses the line. Because
Okay,
you're there taking that picture, you need to ask the person their permission. In
Okay.
my opinion, you need to ask, especially if it's someone underage, for sure. So
And-
does
yeah.
anybody work for a newspaper who has some experience with that?
well, I mean, I freelance for the Baltimore Business Journal and at times
Okay,
I've done
so
things for the Sun.
so tell us about your experience. How does that work?
Well, no, I mean, you get the person's name and you get their permission for them to use the publication. Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, so we're definitely in
So I
agreement.
guess I answered my own question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, Phyllis.
Mac? Yeah.
Um,
Where's
we,
the- anyway.
we had an attorney who deals with copyright law.
Uh-huh.
And the issue still is that if you're in public space, there is no permission needed to take a photograph. Now, with one caveat, if I then pose the person, then I need to have a copyright. I need to have permission.
Yeah.
But anybody in public space, you do not need a copyright for them. I mean, not a
Even
copyright.
if you make money off of it.
Doesn't matter, right?
mm,
When you look at their street photography, they're taking pictures of people in public space. They're not getting permission for it, and they're writing books. The theory is that when you are in a public space, you are part of the scene, and there is no permission needed to take a photograph.
That is true. I'm not sure that I agree with it. So I think, especially if you're photographing somebody that's underage, I think it's different. Now, if the person just doesn't see you, they're part of a crowd or whatever. I mean, like we saw from, what was that picture that won last week of the guy on the iPhone, using the iPhone. So, I'm sure that there was no permission that was taken from him. So
Right,
it's really complex. It's a complex issue.
I think
Right,
Matt,
I think also, I think as a photographer, like even though you may have an opportunity to take that photo and legally take it, I still think you have to have some moral ethics about what you shoot and how you shoot it.
I agree 1000%, Jim.
and do no harm.
Do no harm. That is
Matt-
what I always told my
Matt,
students
yeah.
first, do no harm. So,
Matt, did you want to put in your
Yeah.
opinion? I think you have an interesting point of view.
So, hey, sorry, my voice is a little shot, but like one thing that I think can kind of be a sticky situation, and I think of that Duke of Windsor photo you showed, but also Arnold Newman's picture of Alfred Krupp, who is a convicted Nazi war criminal, where neither of those people were probably very happy with how that final image made them look. But in that case, those are Nazis. We shouldn't show them in a positive light. I do think it just goes down to that we have to treat average folks differently than public figures when it comes to this style of photography.
So, well, I'm not sure that I understand your point. So
No, he's talking about people who are public figures versus private
right.
people.
Yeah, well, I mean, anybody, like, for example, the Windsors, they put their trust in Avedon and hoped that he was going to do the right thing by them. I do not know if this was just part of a series where he asked them to come in, or whether they hired him, or, you know, what this image, how was this image used? I really don't know. So, but I mean, I think public figures do give up their privacy when they become public figures. So, and we, you know, like, we see.
Well, don't we all give up our privacy on social media? We are all public figures now. We're making ourselves cross the line. Anyways, Jennifer, you made a good comment.
I was just saying that, you know, just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's ethical. Just like if something is legal doesn't mean that it's safe. And we all have to figure out, I guess, where our own line is with that. You know, like you can legally go to the playground and photograph children playing on the playground. Doesn't mean that it's ethical.
Well, and also just thinking about what are you going to do with that picture? So I think I'm okay with taking pictures of anything, but if I sell that picture, if that picture goes in a book, if that picture ends up in a museum wall, if it ends up in a newspaper, you know, then I think that's a problem. So other questions?
I would just comment, like, Kenny took my picture for BCC the other week. On the one hand, he might use my picture, but on the other hand, I might use his picture. Just a thought.
Can you elaborate? What do you mean?
I mean, I did modeling in my 20s, and the photographer gave me the rights to his photos. But, you know, sometimes we might kind of lose track of the right of our photo too. That being the only circumstance I could really think of where Kenny took the picture of me, it was shown up on the wall, and so I have a picture of Kenny's picture.
Oh.
Well, you know, I'd like to speak to that for a second. And Kenny, I'm sure you can relate to this. So years ago, I had a photography studio. And one reason that I got out of the studio was that I started seeing my photos everywhere. I started seeing them in all kinds of publications that I hadn't agreed to. You know, people were just like, at that time, they were, you know, taking the photo and having it rephotographed, and, you know, I mean, they were ending up everywhere. Now I would do it differently. I would do a buyout, you know, and just say, here's how much you pay for the session, and you know, do whatever you want with them. But you know, I just felt like I'm never going to make any money again, because they're going to just they're never going to ask me for prints again. And the other thing that really bothered me, and Kenny, you can probably relate to this too, is that I knew that when I printed those negatives, that I was going to be very precise. I was going to do a great job. I was going to have perfect contrast. I was, you know, really, really worked hard at it. But when I saw reproductions of my own images, they look like crap, you know. And it's like, and Phyllis took this. Well, that didn't reflect very well on me. So that was when I did. And I had also started teaching, you know, so I figured, okay, it's time to get out.
Well, I think part of that question is that you have to educate the client. Like when I do prints for clients, I do the printing and I tell them why, where they need to take, where the prints need to be shot at from a professional print lab, archiving, ink, things of this nature. Now, and today you really have to educate clients that taking a print to Walmart or Walgreens is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
No, you have to let them know.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I was
My
working
point
with
was
that.
more, if we don't want our photographs taken, why would we want to not respect somebody having their image taken?
Wait, what do you
So,
mean?
They're
well,
both images being taken, whether we as the photographer, if we're a street photographer walking around looking like we're talking on our phone, but we're taking random photos, even though it's legal in the public domain, would we really want to do that? Because would we want our photos taken? No. So would we want our images taken? It's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
But the
Just-
legalities are different. Legally, the person who takes the photo has a legal protection against that image. The person in the image doesn't have a legal right to that image unless they've purchased that prior to.
I want to
Again,
ask,
ethics
See-
comes into play, but like legally it's not the same.
Ron,
Right,
Phyllis-
but I'm saying when we're as photographers thinking about it, that's another way to look at it.
and Ron,
Yeah, can we come back to your subject
Yeah.
about documentation? And maybe if you give another talk, I'd like to get your opinion. I don't think there is such a thing as documentation photography. The fact that you're
found out that,
there,
and
you come
I
from a
agree.
different culture, you already have your own story. It's a story. You are a story. It doesn't matter if you don't alter your negative.
well,
What
we
you
all
chose
have
to
a
show-
point of view, and we all
Right.
have our own biases, whether we know it or not. And that can often come out in our photography.
right.
And I would
And-
like you to address that when if you give another talk.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like even, I'll tell you something real simple, and that is like, for those of you that know me in person, I'm a little person. I'm a little person. So if I'm out shooting, I'm always looking up. And what does that say about my subject? It makes them into this iconic, person. I might not be thinking about them that way.
You
but
look up to a lot of people.
So, but Sandy, I know that you just came back from Cuba. Did you get some direction in terms of, like, did
Cultural.
you have to get permission from people, or how did that work in Cuba? Did I just put you on the spot?
Sandy, she asked you.
oh,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. I didn't hear it was for me. What
Oh,
did you?
yeah. So I was just going to say, you just came back from Cuba. Did they give you some guidelines for photographing in Cuba?
No, really, no, it was street photography. We were in the public.
So anything
And
goes.
some people were asking permission of the Cubans, and most often they agreed. And if they said no, we'd walk away. But it was a group, so we were very obvious
Yeah.
to everybody on the street. So if they didn't want their photo taken, they just would turn away.
Ran away.
But no, I have an issue with the lack of sort of, the information about what is ethical, what is legal, what the leader hoped we would do. So, yeah.
Well, I'd love to have someone come and who has experience with this to come and talk about it. Because I personally am not a documentary photographer. I'm more of a historian. And it would be wonderful to have someone who, really is well versed in that to be able to.
But actually, as you know, as a historian, history is written by the victor, right?
Yes.
Right? So growing up in Canada, the War of 1812 was taught a little differently to me. Being on the land of the Brits. And then actually in grade 7, I had a First Nation teacher who told us the third side of the two stories.
Oh, yeah.
About how the natives were treated during the war. So anyways, yes, so there's always a different side to every story. There's always a third side to the two sides of the coin.
Phyllis, I want to get back to what Sandy was saying about Cuba.
Yeah.
I think when you're doing any type of photography, I do a lot of photography internationally. I think as a photographer, you need to do your homework as far as cultural permission.
Yes.
Now, here's a good example. When you're in Haiti, you need to ask permission to take a photo. Because in Haiti, they believe that when you're taking a photo, from a spiritual standpoint, you are stealing their soul. Same, and I just got back from
Guatemala.
anyway, I can't think. But anyway, where I was at, Guatemala, I'm sorry, Guatemala. They're very spiritual. And so some places where you want to do photo work, even street photography, you need to know the cultural ramifications in photographing in those cultures because they have different belief systems. And so I think that's important. So even though the photo may be legal to take, from a culture standpoint, it may be prohibited.
Well, that harkens back to Steve McCurry taking that photograph of Sharma Gupta, because her culture was telling her that she should not expose herself.
Mhm.
He, in a sense, forced her to. She couldn't stand up to him. She was just a little girl. She was only 10 years old.
Right.
And what he did was also dangerous for her.
Yeah.
So she could have been arrested for that.
Right.
Mhm.
You know,
Mike, it looks like Michael Washington, I think, left, but he put up something about what about paparazzi ethics. I think that's interesting. What are your thoughts?
Oh gosh, that's
I guess
not
that's
something that
Ouija.
I know about. Ask Prince Harry, ask Meghan Markle.
Yeah.
I mean, they really have a problem with the press. I think if you're a celebrity, you know, you kind of give up your rights in some ways, but you know, that's really not anything in my area of expertise.
No, I think there should be some kind of basic level of decency.
Well, I think that newsrooms do have those ethical guidelines. And you know, the question is if the paparazzi or the photographer is in the public street and shooting into somebody's backyard, that's a pretty clear
Violation.
Violation of it. Yes, but
Mhm.
there's, you know, it's.
Well, think back to Princess Diana.
Yeah.
It
Basically killed her.
caused her death. You know, so it's this greed that paparazzi seem to exhibit, where because they get such tremendous amounts of money for certain types of pictures.
But even from a legal standpoint, if you're taking a photo and somebody's backyard is visible from a public space, that is still considered within a reasonable expectation of privacy. And from a legal standpoint, is still permissible. It would only be if you had to go through great lengths to bypass privacy to photograph into their yard that it would no longer be legal.
And that's when it gets messy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted, but yeah.
Phil, I had one other question for you. I had an instructor. I was taking actually Robert Stockstill was he was a presenter for Baltimore Camera Club. He's also one of my instructors. He worked for American newspaper, and he was an editorial photographer. And one of the things he said that really stuck with me over the years is that when a photographer is taking a photo, you are actually bringing all of your history, prejudice, your attitudes, and your life experience with you when you're taking a photograph. And so to some degree, you are affecting how the photograph is being taken by your own experiences. So when you were showing the different pictures, we can also say that maybe some of these choices of why some photographers took a photo one way versus another has a lot to do with their own personal experiences in life.
Yeah.
But why is that a bad thing?
I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. But you have to realize is that you as an individual are affecting how you're seeing the photograph.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I hate to be the one to cut this off, but it is almost
10 o'clock.
10.
Turning
Well,
into pumpkins now.
I do need my beauty sleep. So,
This is great,
oh,
Phyllis. You're
I
amazing.
know I am going to work with Phil and have the 2.0 scheduled. And we'll figure out, how to answer some of these questions and how to carry it forward. So to be continued is what I'm going to say.
Yes,
Okay?
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay.
yes.
Oh, wait, here you go. More cowbell.
Thank you, Phil. Oh, I didn't get to thank you. Thank you, Phil. I mean, I will be emailing you.
okay.
Oh,
You're
it was
welcome.
just, yeah.
Had a great time. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Very good session. Really loved it.
Okay,
Thanks.
good night.
It was engaging. We were engaged, right, Phyllis?
Yes, it was great. Okay. All
Good
right.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.